In a quiet little town surrounded by tall trees and winding roads, there was an old high school that stood like a forgotten relic of the past. Its faded paint peeled off in patches. Its hallways echoed with the sound of hurried footsteps during class changes, and its classrooms buzzed with the chatter of teenagers too caught up in their own worlds to notice much else. Among these unnoticed parts of the school was Mr. Harold Jenkins, the janitor. Harold was not someone you'd typically pay attention to. He was a man in his late 50s with thinning gray hair, weathered hands, and a pair of worn-out sneakers that squeaked softly as he moved through the corridors. His job wasn't glamorous. He cleaned bathrooms, emptied trash cans, fixed leaky faucets, and mopped floors every day without fail. To most people, he was just the guy who keeps things tidy. But if anyone had taken the time to really look at him, they might have noticed something unusual about Harold. There was a calmness in his eyes, a quiet confidence that suggested he knew more about life than he let on. Every morning, Harold arrived at the school before sunrise. He liked the peaceful silence of the empty building before students and teachers filled it with noise. It gave him time to think, to reflect on the years gone by, and to prepare himself mentally for the long day ahead. On one particular autumn morning, however, Harold's routine took an unexpected turn. It was early October, and the air carried a crisp chill that hinted at winter's approach. As Harold unlocked the science lab to start his cleaning duties, he heard a faint sound coming from inside the storage closet, a soft whimper, almost drowned out by the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. At first, he thought maybe it was a stray cat or some other small animal that had wandered into the school. But when he opened the door, what he found stopped him in his tracks. Sitting on the cold, hard floor of the cramped closet was Emily Carter, a shy sophomore who rarely spoke to anyone outside her close circle of friends. Her face was streaked with tears, her knees pulled tightly to her chest and her hands clenched around a crumpled piece of paper. She looked startled when she saw Harold standing there, but instead of scolding her for being in a place she shouldn't be, Harold simply crouched down beside her. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, his voice low and soothing. Emily hesitated, clearly unsure whether to trust this man who spent his days sweeping floors and wiping down desks. But something in Harold's kind expression put her at ease. After a moment, she nodded, toward the crumpled note in her hand. With trembling fingers, she unfolded it and handed it to Harold. The note was written in messy handwriting, each word dripping with venom. It read, "You think you're so smart, don't you? Keep talking. Back in class, and we'll make sure you regret it." Below the message were signatures, or rather, crude doodles meant to represent signatures, from 3 different students. Harold recognized the names instantly. They belonged to a group of boys notorious for bullying others. As Harold read the note, his jaw tightened slightly, but he kept his tone calm and reassuring. "This is serious," he said, looking directly into Emily's tear-filled eyes. "Do your parents know about this?" Emily shook her head quickly. "No, I don't want them to worry, and besides, I didn't do anything wrong. I just answered a question in class yesterday. Why are they mad at me?" Her voice cracked as she spoke, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Harold felt a pang of sadness deep in his chest. He remembered all too well what it was like to be bullied as a child. The loneliness, the fear, the feeling of being powerless. Back then, no one had stepped in to help him, but now here he was, face to face with a young girl going through the same pain. This time, he decided, things would be different. "Listen to me," Harold said firmly, placing a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. "You did nothing wrong. Standing up for yourself and for what's right is important. Don't ever forget that." For the next few minutes, Harold stayed with Emily, listening patiently as she poured out her frustrations and fears. By the time she finally calmed down enough to leave the closet, a seed of determination had already begun to grow in Harold's mind. He couldn't change the world overnight, but maybe, just maybe, he could make a difference in this one corner of it. Little did Harold realize, this simple act of kindness would set off a chain reaction that would ripple far beyond the walls of the school. For now, though, he simply watched as Emily gathered her things and walked away, her steps a little lighter than before. As Harold closed the storage closet door behind her, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life, and the lives of those around him, was about to change forever. The sun had risen higher in the sky by the time Harold finished cleaning the science lab. Outside, the schoolyard was beginning to fill with students arriving for the day. Laughter and chatter floated through the windows, masking the weight of what had just transpired inside. But for Harold, the memory of Emily's tear-streaked face lingered, urging him to take action. What exactly that action would be, he didn't yet know. All he knew was that he couldn't stand idly by while injustice continued to thrive unnoticed. And so as the bell rang and the school came alive with activity, Harold made a silent promise to himself. He would do whatever it took to protect those who couldn't protect themselves, even if it meant stepping out of the shadows and into the spotlight. The next morning, Harold woke up earlier than usual. The events of the previous day weighed heavily on his mind. He couldn't stop thinking about Emily's tear-streaked face and the crumpled note she had shown him. It wasn't just her pain that haunted him. It was the realization that bullying like this probably happened more often than anyone realized. How many other students were suffering in silence, too afraid to speak up? And how many teachers or staff members turned a blind eye because they didn't want to get involved? Harold had always prided himself on staying out of trouble. His job as a janitor kept him busy enough without adding drama to the mix. But now, something inside him refused to let go of what he had seen. He thought back to his own childhood, the endless teasing, the cruel nicknames, the feeling of being invisible, and he knew he couldn't stand by and do nothing. If he didn't step in, who would? That morning, Harold arrived at school even earlier than usual. He parked his old pickup truck in the nearly empty lot and grabbed his cleaning supplies from the back seat. As he walked toward the main entrance, he noticed the cafeteria lights were already on. Peering through the glass doors, he saw a group of students gathered near the vending machines. Among them were the 3 boys whose names he had recognized on Emily's note. Harold hesitated for a moment, gripping the handle of his mop tightly. What could he possibly say to them? They were teenagers, loud, brash, and full of bravado. Would they even listen to someone like him, a janitor? Still, he reminded himself why he was doing this. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the door and stepped inside. The boys barely glanced at him as he entered, their laughter filling the room. One of them was recounting some exaggerated story about a prank they had pulled on another student. Harold moved closer, pretending to sweep the floor near their table. At first, they ignored him completely, but when one of them made a snide comment about the guy with the mop, Harold decided it was time to act. "Excuse me," he said, his voice steady despite the nervous flutter in his stomach. The boys stopped talking and turned to look at him, clearly surprised that the janitor had dared to interrupt them. "What?" one of them sneered, leaning back in his chair. "You lost or something?" Harold ignored the tone and took a step closer. "I heard you've been giving some of the younger kids a hard time lately," he said calmly. "Is that true?" The boys exchanged glances, smirking as if this was all some big joke. "What's it to you, old man?" another one asked, crossing his arms defiantly. "You're just the janitor." For a moment, Harold felt a flicker of doubt. Maybe this wasn't such a good idea after all. These boys were bigger and louder than him, and he was just one person against 3. But then he remembered Emily's tears and the fear in her eyes. He straightened his posture and looked each of them directly in the eye. "It matters to me because it's wrong," he said firmly. "Picking on someone smaller or weaker doesn't make you tough. It makes you cowards. And trust me, people remember cowards long after they forget bullies." His words hung in the air, cutting through their laughter like a knife. For a brief second, the boys seemed taken aback, unsure how to respond. Then, one of them chuckled nervously and muttered, "Whatever, dude. We're just messing around." But Harold wasn't finished. "Messing around?" he repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Do you think Emily Carter thinks you're just messing around? Because I can tell you right now she doesn't." At the mention of Emily's name, the boys shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One of them mumbled something under his breath while another avoided Harold's gaze altogether. Finally, the leader of the group stood up abruptly, glaring at Harold. "Stay out of our business, okay?" he snapped before storming off, his friends trailing behind him. As the cafeteria fell silent once again, Harold leaned against his mop and exhaled slowly. He hadn't expected them to apologize or suddenly change their ways, but he had planted a seed of doubt in their minds. That was something, at least. Over the next few weeks, Harold continued to keep an eye on the boys. Whenever he saw them harassing another student, he stepped in, not aggressively but firmly enough to remind them that someone was watching. Sometimes he simply stood nearby, his presence alone enough to deter them. Other times he called them out directly, using the same calm yet authoritative tone that had worked in the cafeteria. Word of Harold's actions began to spread among the students. At first, they whispered about it in hushed tones, wondering why the usually invisible janitor was suddenly taking such an interest in school drama. Some thought it was funny, others admired his courage, and a few even started seeking him out for advice. One afternoon, a freshman named Jake approached Harold while he was fixing a leaky sink in the boys' bathroom. Mr. Jenkins?" Jake said hesitantly, shifting from foot to foot. "Can I talk to you about something?" Harold smiled warmly, setting down his wrench. "Of course, Jake. What's on your mind?" Jake hesitated, glancing over his shoulder to make sure no one else was listening. "Well, there's this kid in my class who keeps getting picked on during lunch. He sits alone every day and I feel bad for him, but I don't know what to do. Everyone says I'll get targeted too if I try to help." Harold nodded thoughtfully. "That's a tough situation," he admitted. "But here's the thing. Doing the right thing isn't always easy. Sometimes it means standing up for someone even when it's scary. Do you think that kid would appreciate knowing he has a friend looking out for him?" Jake considered this for a moment before nodding slowly. "Yeah, I guess so." "Then start small," Harold suggested. "Sit with him at lunch tomorrow. Invite him to join you and your friends. Little actions can make a big difference." Jake left with a newfound sense of purpose, and Harold couldn't help but feel proud of himself. He was starting to see changes, not just in individual students, but in the overall atmosphere of the school. Conversations in the hallways became less hostile, and groups of students who had once been divided began sitting together at lunch. Teachers noticed the shift as well, though none of them could quite figure out what had caused it. Meanwhile, Emily was also beginning to come out of her shell. Encouraged by Harold's support, she joined the debate club, where she discovered a passion for public speaking. Her confidence grew with each passing week, and soon she was leading discussions and inspiring others to stand up against injustice. She often stopped by Harold's office to thank him for believing in her when no one else did. Despite these positive changes, not everyone was happy about Harold's growing influence. Some parents complained to the principal, claiming it wasn't his place to meddle in students' lives. Even the principal herself called Harold into her office one afternoon to express her concerns. "Mr. Jenkins," she said, stern past times. The principal's office was quiet except for the faint ticking of a clock on the wall. Harold sat across from Mrs. Thompson, the school's stern-faced principal, who looked at him with a mixture of frustration and concern. She had called him in to discuss the growing number of complaints from parents about his involvement in student affairs. "Mr. Jenkins," she began, folding her hands neatly on the desk. "I understand your intentions are good, but you have to understand that this isn't your role. You're here to clean the school, not to meddle in personal issues or discipline matters." Harold nodded slowly, taking a deep breath before responding. "I hear what you're saying, Mrs. Thompson, and I respect it. But if I see something wrong happening, something that could hurt a child, I can't just turn my back. That wouldn't be right." Mrs. Thompson sighed, rubbing her temples as if she were dealing with a particularly stubborn headache. "It's not about turning a blind eye, Harold. It's about boundaries. We have counselors, teachers, and administrators for these kinds of situations. Your job is important, but it's different." "I get that," Harold replied calmly, meeting her gaze. "But sometimes kids don't feel comfortable talking to counselors or teachers. Sometimes they need someone quieter, someone who won't judge them or make a big deal out of things. And if being that person makes a difference, Even a small one, then I think it's worth it. Mrs. Thompson studied him for a long moment, clearly torn between enforcing rules and acknowledging the positive impact Harold was having. Finally, she leaned back in her chair and said, "Just be careful, Harold. I don't want any more complaints from parents. If you step too far outside your lane, I might not be able to protect you." With that, the meeting ended, leaving Harold to ponder the weight of her words. He knew she was right. His actions weren't without risk. Still, he couldn't bring himself to stop. Every time he saw a student smile because they felt heard or watched a bully hesitate because they knew someone was watching, he felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. Over the next few weeks, Harold continued his quiet crusade, though he did so more discreetly. Instead of confronting bullies directly, he focused on building relationships with students who seemed lost or struggling. One by one, they began opening up to him, sharing their fears, dreams, and struggles. Some talked about problems at home, parents, fighting, financial stress, or feeling neglected. Others confided in him about academic pressures or friendships gone sour. No matter the issue, Harold listened patiently, offering advice drawn from his own life experiences. One such student was Mia Rodriguez, a junior known for her sharp wit and sarcastic humor. On the surface, Mia appeared confident and self-assured, but Harold noticed the cracks beneath her tough exterior. During lunch breaks, she often sat alone in the library, scribbling furiously in a notebook. One day, Harold approached her cautiously, holding a cup of coffee he'd brought from the cafeteria. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, gesturing to the empty seat beside her. Mia glanced up, surprised. Sure, I guess." They sat in silence for a while, Harold sipping his coffee while Mia continued writing. Eventually, curiosity got the better of her. "Why are you even talking to me?" she blurted out, setting her pen down. "You're the janitor. Shouldn't you be, I don't know, cleaning toilets or something?" Harold chuckled softly. "I am the janitor, that's true. But I'm also human. Humans talk, share stories, help each other out when they can. So, why not?" Mia raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. Over time, their conversations became more frequent and she started opening up about her struggles. Her parents were going through a messy divorce, and she felt caught in the middle. Writing poetry was her way of coping, though she rarely showed her work to anyone. "You should share your poems," Harold encouraged her one afternoon. "Art has a way of connecting people. Maybe you'll find others who feel the same way you do." At first, Mia dismissed the idea, insisting no one would care about her angsty teenage ramblings. But Harold persisted, gently nudging her, until she finally agreed to read one of her poems aloud during an open mic night hosted by the drama club. To her astonishment, the audience responded with thunderous applause, and several students approached her afterward to say how much her words resonated with them. From that day forward, Mia blossomed. She joined the creative writing club, submitted her work to literary magazines, and even started mentoring younger students interested in poetry. When she thanked Harold for believing in her, tears glistened in her eyes. "I never thought anyone would actually listen," she admitted. "But you did, and it changed everything." Emily Carter, too, continued to grow under Harold's guidance. With his encouragement, she took on leadership roles in the debate club, organizing events and mentoring freshmen who struggled with public speaking. Her confidence soared, and she became a vocal advocate for anti-bullying initiatives both within the school and beyond. At one point, she even convinced the student council to host a school-wide assembly featuring guest speakers who had overcome bullying themselves. During the assembly, Emily stood on stage, microphone in hand, and addressed the entire school. "When I was bullied last year, I felt like there was no way out," she began, her voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in her chest. But then someone stepped in, not because it was their job, but because they cared. That person taught me that standing up for yourself isn't just about bravery. It's about knowing you deserve to be treated with kindness and respect. As she spoke, Emily glanced toward the back of the auditorium, where Harold stood leaning against a wall, arms crossed, and a proud smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Their eyes met briefly, and Emily felt a surge of gratitude wash over her. Without Harold, she doubted she would have found the courage to speak up, or to inspire others to do the same. The ripple effect of Harold's actions extended far beyond individual students. Teachers began noticing subtle shifts in classroom dynamics. Students who had once been withdrawn or disruptive started participating more actively in discussions. Friendships formed across cliques that had previously been divided by popularity contests or petty rivalries. Even the cafeteria, a place notorious for its rigid seating arrangements, became a space where mixed groups of students sat together, laughing and sharing stories. Of course, not everyone embraced the changes. Some students resented the newfound unity, feeling threatened by the breakdown of traditional hierarchies. A handful of teachers grumbled about the unnecessary chaos caused by shifting social norms. And yet, despite these murmurs of discontent, the overall atmosphere of the school improved dramatically. Parents who had initially complained about Harold's interference began to see the results firsthand. Their children came home happier, more engaged and eager to talk about their day. Slowly but surely, skepticism gave way to admiration, and Harold found himself receiving heartfelt thank you notes slipped into his locker or left on his desk. Even the bullies, the ones Harold had confronted in the cafeteria months earlier, started changing their behavior. They didn't transform overnight, but small gestures spoke volumes. One boy apologized to a classmate he had mocked relentlessly. Another offered to tutor a struggling peer in math. These acts of kindness may have seemed insignificant to outsiders, but to Harold, they were proof that change was possible. By the end of the semester, Harold's reputation as the school's unofficial guardian had solidified. Students greeted him warmly in the hallways, calling him Mr. Jenkins instead of the janitor. Teachers sought his input during staff meetings, valuing his unique perspective on student life. Even Mrs. Thompson softened her stance, admitting privately that the school was better off with Harold's quiet influence. For Harold, the greatest reward wasn't recognition. It was knowing he had made a difference. Each smile, each word of thanks, each act of courage reminded him why he had chosen to step out of the shadows. In a world full of noise and distractions, he had chosen to listen. And in doing so, he had sparked a chain reaction of kindness, empathy, and hope that rippled far beyond the walls of the school. Little did he know, however, that his journey was far from over. While the school celebrated its newfound harmony, storm clouds loomed on the horizon, challenges that would test Harold's resolve and force him to confront the limits of his quiet heroism. But for now, as winter snow blanketed the town and holiday decorations adorned the school halls, Harold allowed himself a rare moment of contentment. He had planted seeds of change, and he was eager to see how they would continue to grow. Winter had settled over the small town, blanketing the school grounds in a thick layer of snow. Inside the building, however, tension simmered beneath the surface. Despite the improvements in the school's atmosphere, not everyone was happy with the changes Harold had inspired. Some students still clung to old habits, resenting the shift in power dynamics and the newfound unity among their peers. Among them was Ryan Collins, one of the boys Harold had confronted months earlier in the cafeteria. Ryan wasn't a bad kid, he just didn't know how to deal with his emotions. His home life was chaotic, his parents were constantly arguing, and he often felt like no one understood him. At school, bullying had been his way of asserting control, of feeling powerful when everything else seemed out of his hands. But now, with Harold and others calling him out on his behavior, Ryan felt cornered. He lashed out more frequently, picking fights or making snide comments whenever he could. The teachers tried to intervene, but nothing seemed to work. One chilly, January morning, the tension finally boiled over. It started during third period in the crowded hallway between classes. A group of students stood chatting near the lockers, laughing and joking around. Among them was Lucas, a quiet freshman who had recently befriended Emily through the debate club. Lucas was still finding his footing socially, but he had grown, more confident thanks to Emily's encouragement. As he listened to his friends talk, he noticed Ryan walking toward them, a scowl etched across his face. "What are you losers talking about?" Ryan sneered, shoving past Lucas and bumping into him hard enough to knock him off balance. Lucas stumbled backward, catching himself against the lockers. "Nothing," he muttered, trying to avoid eye contact. Ryan smirked, clearly enjoying the attention he was getting from nearby students. "Oh, come on, don't be such a baby." He leaned closer, lowering his voice so only Lucas could hear. "Or maybe you're too scared to say anything because your little girlfriend Emily isn't here to protect you." The comment stung, but Lucas didn't respond. Instead, he turned away, hoping to walk off before things escalated further. But Ryan wasn't done. With a cruel laugh, he grabbed Lucas's backpack and yanked it off his shoulder, spilling its contents onto the floor. Books, papers, and pens scattered everywhere, drawing gasps from the growing crowd of onlookers. "Pick it up," Ryan barked, kicking one of the textbooks farther down the hall. "Go on, pick it up. Or are you too weak?" Lucas froze, humiliation burning in his cheeks. Tears welled up in his eyes as he bent down to gather his belongings. The other students watched silently, unsure what to do. No one wanted to step in, not yet. But then, something unexpected happened. From the edge of the hallway, Harold appeared. He had been cleaning a nearby classroom when he heard the commotion and immediately rushed to investigate. Seeing Ryan towering over Lucas, who cowered on the floor, Harold's jaw tightened. Without hesitation, he strode forward, his worn sneakers squeaking against the tiled floor. "That's enough," Harold said firmly, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd like a knife. All eyes turned to him, including Ryan's. For a moment, Ryan looked genuinely startled. Then his expression hardened into a sneer. "What's it to you, old man? This doesn't concern you." Harold didn't flinch. He stepped between Ryan and Lucas, shielding the younger boy with his body. "Actually, it does concern me," he replied calmly. "I won't stand by while someone bullies another student. Not here, not anywhere." Ryan clenched his fists, anger flashing in his eyes. "You think you're some kind of hero? You're just a janitor. And you're just a scared kid pretending to be tough," Harold shot back, his tone unwavering. "Bullying others won't fix whatever's bothering you. It'll only make things worse for everyone." The hallway fell silent. Students exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether Ryan would lash out physically. For several tense seconds, the two figures stood locked in a standoff. Harold, steady and resolute, and Ryan trembling with barely contained rage. Finally, Ryan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pocket knife. The metallic glint of the blade sent a ripple of fear through the crowd. Some students gasped, while others backed away instinctively. Even Harold felt a flicker of unease, but he refused to move. "Put it down, Ryan," Harold said, keeping his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "This isn't the answer." Ryan hesitated, his hand shaking as he gripped the knife. His eyes darted around the hallway, searching for an escape route or a sign of support from his peers. But all he saw were frightened faces staring back at him. Slowly, the realization dawned on him that he was alone. With a strangled cry, Ryan dropped the knife and sank to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "I hate this place," he shouted, his voice cracking. "I hate everything." Harold knelt beside him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're not alone. We'll figure this out together." By the time the principal and security staff arrived, the situation had calmed down. Ryan was escorted to the office, where counselors and administrators worked to understand the root of his behavior. It turned out that his family issues were far more severe than anyone had realized, and he had been using aggression as a coping mechanism. Thanks to Harold's intervention, Ryan received the help he desperately needed rather than facing expulsion or punishment. News of the incident spread quickly, first within the school and then beyond. Parents praised Harold for his bravery, while students hailed him as a hero. Local newspapers picked up the story, dubbing him the janitor who stood up. Journalists flocked to the school, eager to interview Harold and learn more about the man behind the mop bucket. Despite the sudden fame, Harold remained humble. When reporters asked him to recount the events of that day, he simply shrugged and said, "I did what anyone else would have done. I protected a child." Emily, Mia, and other students who had benefited from Harold's guidance rallied around him, defending him against critics who questioned whether he had overstepped his role. "He saved us," Emily told one reporter during an emotional interview. "Not just from bullies, but from ourselves. He made us believe we could be better." In the weeks that followed, Harold's actions sparked a wave of change far beyond the school walls. Anti-bullying campaigns sprang up across the district, inspired by his example. Students organized fundraisers and awareness events, determined to keep the momentum going. Teachers incorporated discussions about empathy and kindness into their lesson plans, encouraging open dialogue about mental health and conflict resolution. Even Hollywood took notice. A major studio optioned Harold's story for a film adaptation, though Harold politely declined to participate in the project. "This isn't about me," he told the producers. "It's about the kids, their courage, their resilience, their ability to grow and change." Back at the school, life slowly returned to normal, or at least a new version of normal. Students greeted Harold warmly in the hallways, treating him with the respect he deserved. Teachers sought his advice on classroom management, recognizing his unique insight into student struggles. And though some parents still grumbled about a janitor meddling in personal matters, most acknowledged the positive impact he had made. For Harold, the greatest reward wasn't recognition. It was seeing the transformation in those around him. Lucas, once timid and insecure, now walked with confidence, knowing he had allies who would stand up for him. Ryan, after months of therapy and reflection, apologized publicly to those he had hurt and vowed to become a better person. Emily, Mia, and countless others continued to thrive, carrying forward the lessons Harold had taught them. Yet even as the storm passed and the dust settled, Harold couldn't shake the feeling that his journey wasn't over. There were still challenges ahead, bigger ones perhaps, and he knew he couldn't face them alone. But for now, as the winter sun cast golden rays over the snow-covered playground, Harold allowed himself a rare moment of peace. He had weathered the storm, and in doing so, he had changed lives, including his own. Little did he know, however, that the true test of his courage was yet to come. Spring arrived, bringing with it a sense of renewal. The snow melted away, revealing patches of green grass and budding flowers around the school grounds. Inside the building, life continued to hum along at its usual pace. Students rushing between classes, teachers preparing lessons, and Harold quietly going about his duties as the janitor. But beneath this ordinary surface, something extraordinary was unfolding. Harold's actions had sparked a movement that transcended the walls of the school. Local leaders took notice of the positive changes happening within the student body and decided to expand anti-bullying initiatives across the entire town. Parents began organizing community meetings to discuss ways to support children struggling with mental health or peer pressure. Even businesses got involved, sponsoring workshops on conflict resolution and self-esteem building for both kids and adults. At the center of it all stood Harold, a man who had once been invisible, but was now celebrated as a symbol of hope and resilience. His story inspired countless others to step forward and make a difference in their own communities. Strangers wrote letters thanking him for reminding them of the power of kindness and courage. Teachers from neighboring schools invited him to speak at assemblies, eager for their students to hear firsthand how one person could ignite change. Despite the growing recognition, Harold remained grounded. Fame wasn't what motivated him. It never had been. What mattered most to him were the smiles he saw on students' faces, the friendships forming in unlikely places, and the knowledge that he had helped create a safer, kinder environment for everyone. Still, there were moments when the weight of everything felt overwhelming. One evening after finishing his shift, Harold sat alone in the dimly lit custodian's office, staring at a stack of thank you notes and newspaper clippings people had given him. Each piece of paper told a different story, of lives touched, fears overcome, and dreams reignited, but they all shared a common thread. Harold's quiet heroism had changed the course of someone's life. He leaned back in his chair, letting out a long sigh. For years, he had carried the burden of his own past, the loneliness, the pain, the feeling of being powerless against bullies. Now he realized those experiences had shaped him into the person he was today. They had taught him empathy, patience, and the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. Just then, a soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Looking up, he saw Emily standing in the doorway, her arms crossed nervously. "Mr. Jenkins," she said hesitantly, "do you have a minute?" "Of course," Harold replied, gesturing for her to sit down. Over the past year, Emily had grown immensely, not just in confidence but also in maturity. She no longer shied away from challenges. Instead, she embraced them head-on, often leading by example. "I wanted to talk to you about something," Emily began, fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. "Graduation is coming up soon, and I've been thinking, I want to dedicate my speech to you." Harold blinked in surprise. "To me? Why?" Emily smiled softly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Because none of this would have happened without you. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You showed me, and everyone else, that we don't have to accept cruelty or injustice. We can fight back, not with anger, but with kindness and courage." Harold shook his head modestly. "I didn't do anything special, Emily. You did the hard work. All I did was give you a little push." "That's exactly it," Emily insisted. "Sometimes all someone needs is a little push to realize they're stronger than they think. And that's what you gave us, all of us." Harold couldn't argue with that. He knew Emily was right, though he still struggled to see himself as anything more than an ordinary man doing what he thought was right. Nevertheless, he nodded in agreement. "If it means that much to you, then I'm honored." On graduation day, the school auditorium buzzed with excitement. Parents filled the rows of seats, cameras at the ready, while graduates lined up, backstage, adjusting caps and smoothing robes. When Emily stepped onto the stage to deliver her valedictorian speech, the room fell silent. She began by recounting her own journey, the bullying she endured, the fear she faced, and the moment. Harold intervened in the storage closet. Her voice trembled slightly as she described how lost and hopeless she had felt, but it grew steadier as she talked about the ripple effect Harold's kindness had created. "Mr. Jenkins taught me something important," Emily said, pausing to glance at Harold, who sat near the back of the auditorium. "He taught me that heroes aren't always the ones wearing capes or saving the world in grand, dramatic ways. Sometimes they're the quiet ones, the ones who sweep floors, fix broken sinks, and listen when no one else will. They're the ones who remind us that every act of kindness matters, no matter how small." The audience erupted into applause, turning to look at Harold, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He hadn't expected this kind of public acknowledgement, but seeing the pride and gratitude on the faces of students, teachers, and parents made it clear that his efforts had left a lasting impact. After the ceremony, Harold found himself surrounded by well-wishers. Students hugged him tightly, thanking him for believing in them. Parents shook his hand, calling him a role model for their children. Teachers patted him on the back, saying things like, "We couldn't have done it without you." Even Mrs. Thompson, the principal, approached him with a warm smile. "You've done incredible work here, Harold," she said sincerely. "This school is better because of you." Harold chuckled, scratching the back of his neck. "I just did my job," he replied humbly. "And maybe a little extra." Mrs. Thompson laughed. "A lot extra, if you ask me." As the crowd dispersed, Harold slipped outside to enjoy a moment of solitude. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the campus. He walked slowly through the familiar hallways, taking in the sights and sounds one last time before heading home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new lives to touch. But for now, Harold allowed himself to reflect on everything that had transpired. From the tear-streaked face of a frightened girl in a storage closet to a packed auditorium cheering for his quiet acts of bravery, he had traveled a remarkable path. Along the way, he had reminded the world of a simple truth. True heroes are defined not by their titles or accomplishments, but by the love and compassion they show to others. As he climbed into his old pickup truck and drove away, Harold felt a deep sense of peace. He might never win awards or appear on magazine covers, but he didn't need those things. His legacy lived on in the hearts of the students he had inspired, their courage, their kindness, their determination to make the world a better place. And that, Harold thought with a contented smile, was worth far more than any trophy.